and welcome to the CCPC November membership meeting. My name is Steve Faleko. I'm the political director of the organization, and I'm going to start off for a few minutes telling you about a few upcoming events and projects that CCPC is working on before we get to the main agenda item, which is Guardians for Fair Work. First of all, one of the things that we found through numerous Zoom meetings over the last year and a half is that when you talk about things and you have links to things and you put it in the chat, it doesn't work so well because folks are going back and forth to the chat and trying to follow the meeting. So what we found works very well is to send a link or to send an email tomorrow with a comprehensive explanation of everything that we've talked about in the meeting and links to various things that we've talked about, so that when you get the email tomorrow and you have some time, you can deal with it if you choose to. The first two links in tomorrow's email are the same after every meeting. One is become a member of the Cuyahoga County Progressive Caucus. And at a lot of our meetings, we have folks who come who aren't members. They see the meeting on Facebook or a friend tells them about it. And if you are not a member, not getting our emails and would like to, membership in the organization is free. And it's kind of like, if you're at this meeting and you are not getting our emails, you probably would like to see what's in our emails. But if you sign up to become a member and start getting our emails and you don't like what you see, there's always a big unsubscribe link at the bottom of the email, because we're a progressive organization and like you guys, we don't want people getting our emails that don't want to get them. There's also going to be a donate link in the email that you get tomorrow. We are all volunteer funded, all volunteer staff. We have an office, we have supplies. We have to have a special email server to send out thousands of emails. So if you can help us out with a small contribution, that would be greatly appreciated. We only exist because of small contributions from people like you. Okay, 5 little quick agenda items before we get to the Guardians for Fair Work. Number 1, 2021 election recap. We endorsed 29 candidates and issues in 2021. Now, actually, it's 28 candidates and 1 issue, which was issue 24, the Citizens for a Safer Cleveland. 22 of those won. 21 candidates, and of course, issue 24 in Cleveland. That's the largest number of endorsed candidates and the highest percentage, over 70% of our candidates won, that we've ever had. And that's great. It's a sign that, maybe things are changing in a progressive way around the county. Most notably, Mayor of Cleveland, Justin Bibb, CCPC endorsed candidate, and Mayor of Cleveland Heights, Khalil Sarah, CCPC endorsed candidate. And looking back at the election, we had 3 Cleveland City Council candidates win. We had 4 that didn't win. But our candidates running for Cleveland City Council often face a very tough road because they are going against entrenched incumbents and who have a lot of connections to the corporate community. And it's very, very difficult to beat an incumbent anywhere, particularly in Cleveland. But we did achieve that to a certain extent. And the mayor's race, I kind of look at that as actually beating an incumbent, because if the other candidate would have won, we would have been sure to have like another Frank Jackson term. And at least now there is a chance that the numerous issues of wealth inequality can be addressed. Looking ahead to 2022, we have a 2022 election committee that actually started work before the November elections in 2021. And, we're talking to candidates. We're going to see which candidates are progressive. We run into a lot of candidates that we call PINOs, progressive in name only. So, we don't want our membership to vote to endorse a PINO. If the PINO has a fancy name and says the right things, but has something in their record that is really very unprogressive. So we'll let you know as soon as we know which races we're going to have candidates forums for, which races we're going to have endorsement votes for, and hopefully like 2021 and 2022, we can add to the number of progressive elected officials in Cuyahoga County. Let me get through all of these before, stopping for questions. And we kind of have a smaller group, so, that actually works better, in some ways. Second item, our precinct committee recruitment project. And if you were at past meetings, we've mentioned this, several times, but we are in the process of recruiting folks who would like to be Democratic Party precinct committee leader. It's also called Central Committee. And I'm not going to explain the whole thing here. There will be a link to a video, which is very comprehensive and explains what the precinct committee leader does. Basically, though, those elections are in the May primary. And you have to, if you want to become a precinct committee leader, have your 5 signatures. That's all you need to run for precinct committee leader in by February. Okay, there's a possibility the courts could move the primary back, but for now, that's what we're dealing with. We really are trying to make the Democratic Party in Cuyahoga County more functional. And of course, we would like to make it more progressive. But before we can even consider any of that, we have to get as many people as we can on the Central Committee, because the Central Committee will vote for the new party chair in May. And it's also in charge of making bylaws changes to the Cuyahoga County Democratic Party. So, if you're listening to this and you're kind of unfamiliar with what the precinct committee person does, but yet, that there's something not quite right with the Cuyahoga County Democratic Party, please look at the video. And if this is something that you think you might want to get involved with, please let us know. Next 2 things are events coming up this week. On Thursday, CCPC member and friend Jennifer O'Donnell is having a fundraiser. If you might remember, Jennifer ran for a Court of Common Pleas judge 2 years ago. She's running again. The fundraiser is going to be in Rocky River, but if you can't make it and can give Jennifer a small contribution, that would be great. Next item, this Saturday. As you may know, there are numerous atrocities that are popping up in the Ohio General Assembly. And one of them is a number of anti-protest bills. To make a long story short, if these protest bills pass, picture a peaceful Black Lives Matter protest in Public Square. And then picture the Proud Boys, or maybe another conservative militia group, standing there with assault rifles. Remember the Rittenhouse case? If these anti-protest bills pass, that's what's going to happen in Ohio. Because if the right-wing militias are allowed to stand at a Black Lives Matter protest with assault weapons and nothing can be done about it, they will. So please, if you can, make it to Public Square this Saturday. It starts at 11:30. It's called Protect Your Right to Protest. And if you can't make it this Saturday, in the email we send tomorrow, and it's in our newsletter, there's a toolkit of what you can do. Contact your state representative, contact the committee chairs that are proposing these atrocious bills. But these are things that we have to do everything we can to stop. By the way, it's supposed to be in the mid-40s Saturday. So, you know, if you plan a December outdoor event, you may get bad weather, but mid-40s isn't bad at Public Square. And the plan is to march from Public Square to the Justice Center. So, you know, sometimes you get cold standing out at Public Square in the wintertime. It'll be a nice walk and it'll be a worthy event. The last thing I want to talk about, and we're going to give you an ask in the email tomorrow about this, is the Build Back Better plan that has passed the House. It's now in the Senate. And you know the back and forth with Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema. And as progressives, we know that everything we'd like to have in that bill isn't in there and isn't going to be in there. But also as progressives, we want to work on issues of wealth inequality. We want to do things that help working class people, that help poor people. And there's a lot of things in the Build Back Better agenda that do just that. So yeah, we can't get the whole thing, but since 2009, when the Affordable Care Act was passed, this is the most comprehensive piece of legislation the federal government has come up with that will actually do something to help working class and impoverished people. So as progressives, it's in our interest to do everything we can to help get that passed. So tomorrow, when you see in the email, call Rob Portman's office, and we'll put the phone number there so you don't have to look it up. Please take a minute to do that. We know, it's a long shot, but what we're trying to do, and other organizations around the county are doing this too, is to just jam his phone message with messages, support the Build Back Better. And all you have to do is say, hi, my name is, I'm a constituent, please support the Build Back Better agenda. What'd that take? Like 15 seconds? Now you can have some fun if somebody actually picks up, but the likely scenario is somebody won't, but your voice, will be heard a little bit. So the main topic tonight is Guardians for Fair Work. And I think it's kind of ironic that we're doing this the day after the progressive field renovations for the Guardians passed in Cleveland City Council. And it's not a coincidence that this campaign is called Guardians for Fair Work, because it piggybacks off the fact that Cleveland City Council and County Council have decided to put $255 million into progressive field renovations. And our ask has always been, well, can you do something like that for working people? So I'm going to introduce Deb Klein and Nora Kelly, who are going to say, yeah, you can do something like that for working people. So Deb, Nora.
Great. I think we have a couple slides to go over, but this is the kind of thing that if folks have questions as we make our way through, we'd love folks to either raise your hand or drop a question in the chat, because we'd like to try to make this interactive to the extent possible. This campaign, and I'll turn things over to Deb in a second if she has any other introductory remarks before we pull the slide deck up. I don't know if Steve's in charge of that. So just by way of background, as Steve said, it was not an accident that the campaign is called Guardians for Fair Work. The intent is essentially say, if our elected officials are making the argument that they are taking public dollars for a private business enterprise on the basis of job creation, there are ways in which they can make jobs better for workers all across the city and not just at this facility. So it was very intentionally crafted that way. So it's around this moment in time. I will say, Steve mentioned the deal passing last night. I think we should all be very proud of the work that the caucus did in pulling together a really thoughtful forum with one of the experts in the country Brad Humphreys, if you haven't seen that on stadium financing. I think it's, even though that passed last night, well worth a watch to understand sort of the changing arguments that are made around trying to justify financing these types of deals. But so I don't know if the Guardians for Fair Work, just to give a little bit of background, I'll detail more of the endorsing organizations as we dig into the slideshow. Do you have the slides?
Nora, Deb, can you get the slideshow up?
Yeah, I just didn't want to put it up until Nora was done.
Okay.
Until she was ready, I got it.
Yeah, so let's go ahead. I think we can go ahead with the slide deck, and I can talk a little bit about the genesis of the campaign. Really this is a collaborative effort. You'll see we've already had a number of organizations endorsing this, but this really largely grew out of efforts of the Northeast Ohio Worker Center, members of the Progressive Caucus, Policy Matters Ohio, talking about a set of public policy interventions that the city can really engage in that can really improve the quality of jobs for workers, again, all across our city. So, Guardians for Fair Work is really meant to essentially call into question, like, there are policy interventions. Again, if city council is in a rush to pass a massive public expenditure on the basis of job creation, which I think is clearly debatable, there are ways that city council can ensure that jobs that workers have all across the city, again, are quality jobs. So there are really two pillars of this campaign. There are two public policies that we're advocating for. One is an ordinance on wage theft, and we'll get into what that actually means, and an ordinance on fair scheduling. So again, the question is, why now, and what is the genesis of this? This is just to sort of repeat a little bit of what Steve said, and that is, we're really in a position now, if you look at what the city is going to contribute, the county and the state, right? Because this is their state money going into this deal as well, that the lease extension will actually total $435 million over a 15-year period for this lease extension until 2036. Really the argument has been that we have to do this by a lot of members of council because we want to make sure that we have good jobs in the city. And so I think our question is pretty simple. Shouldn't lawmakers also ensure that quality jobs across Cleveland pay workers fairly and treat workers with dignity? It's a pretty simple proposition, right? And we have two public policies that go a long way in addressing that. So, Deb, you want to go ahead to the next slide? So what is wage theft? Anyone on the call ever experienced wage theft? See anyone? Anyone in the chat? Anyone ever experienced wage theft? Anyone not ever having, okay, see Deb raising her hand. Anyone that's not heard of the term wage theft? Just kind of curious if there's anyone that hasn't heard of the term. Really, wage theft is a very pervasive problem all across the country. Some folks may be familiar. Kim Bobo really wrote the seminal book on the question of wage theft in America in a 2008 book that really brought into very sharp relief. It was republished in 2011, but really brought into sharp relief all across the economy, particularly in lower wage service sector jobs, just how significant when you actually start to quantify the degree to which workers are either misclassified or wages are stolen from them. So let me give you a little sense of what this looks like, and I may have Deb give a couple of examples too if she wanted to jump in. But this is often the scenario where you're required to do some prep work before you actually punch in on the clock, right? So you're doing work off the clock. You're required to clock out and then clean up your station and prep for the next day. Or if you're in an office-based job where you're required to finish a call, even if you are only getting paid till 5 and you stay on that call until 5:15, and it happens pervasively. Over time, that adds up to be really significant dollars that workers are not being paid, that they're entitled to be paid. It's also a scenario where you're entitled to overtime pay and you're not being given the overtime pay, or misclassified as a salaried worker, for example, to have an employer avoid having to pay that type of overtime. But it is honestly, when you look at it in terms of total numbers, one of the largest problems of theft in the entire country. It exceeds larceny and a whole bunch of other things when you look at it in terms of total dollar amount. So Deb, I don't know if you wanted to give a couple of examples.
There are a couple of other examples, and part-time workers are here, but what happens to a lot of part-time workers is they're actually working over 35 hours they work 40 hours a week, but they're still classified as part-time, and it's theft in a different light, and that's so that the employer can avoid paying benefits, health care, or paying the taxes. The other thing is the misclassification is 1099ing the worker and making them work under contract. And one of the biggest offenders of this is FedEx. And FedEx has been sued so many times by the federal government, but they'll continue to pay the penalties because it's cheaper for them to pay the millions of dollars in penalties than it is to pay their workers benefits. So most of the FedEx delivery people that you see are actually contract workers, and they're exploited really badly. But as I said, FedEx has decided it's cheaper to just keep paying the fines.
Yeah, yeah. And the misclassification in those instances means that those employers are not paying payroll taxes that are really critical to funding Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid over time. So again, like those FICA and FUTA taxes. But again, like there's often cases where the minimum wage is not being paid that workers are owed. So again, like this sort of crops up in a whole host of ways. But again, you see it most intensely concentrated in service sector jobs, where workers are often afraid of retaliation and other issues in terms of reporting that. Or quite honestly, the more you look at some of the research on this in Kim Bobo's book, some of this is people are just unaware that they're actually being stolen from, even though their labor is going in and they're not being compensated for the entirety of their labor. So again, it's a really pervasive problem all across the economy. So if we want to go ahead to the next slide. So again, who experiences this? I sort of alluded to this, but and we'll get to it. Policy Matters Ohio really took a more granular look at how this crops up in Ohio. But if you look at it in Cleveland in particular, you see this in areas that probably won't surprise many of you. In the care workforce, you see this happen in childcare, home care and home health, and nursing home settings. So again, in those care economy jobs, jobs that are really critical to make other work possible, right? And you see this very, very pervasively in food service work. So particularly in full service restaurants, but also often in fast food restaurants. And then you see this crop up in really significant ways for retail workers as well. So that's probably not a surprise to anyone that's on the call, that those are sort of the areas that we see the most significant scale wage theft occurring. Those tend to be jobs that are hourly, and you see this happen regularly.
I'll just add, especially with the retail workers, one of the worst offenders there happens to be Walmart. What they do to the workers there is, again, they're working part-time, but they may be working in the housewares department. So they're technically a housewares worker, and they'll require the worker to go in and work in a different department, but those hours don't add up for overtime, and they're misclassified again as part-time when they're sometimes working 40 or more hours. But because they're in different departments, they're classified differently, and Walmart's been able to get away with that for years.
Great. Do we have any questions from folks before we go to the next slide? All right. Cruising right along. I will say before we start this slide, you're all probably wondering, isn't this illegal? It is in fact illegal, but one of the problems, we were going to get to this slide, is the question of enforcement, right? So again, I sort of mentioned this earlier, or sort of provided a little prelude. The Economic Policy Institute estimates that employers in Ohio steal wages from about 217,000 Ohio workers through minimum wage violations alone. So that's just one category of wage theft again, right? So you can kind of get a sense of the scale of that if you're thinking about minimum wage violations alone, which is just one category of the entire picture of wage theft. So just to give you a little sense, we're a pretty big state, right? With a lot of people. What's the total population? Do we have around, is it 7 million people in the state of Ohio? I believe. Last I looked, or somewhere in there. There are 5 investigators in the entirety of the state of Ohio to oversee this. So we have 5.5 million jobs. So you can get a sense of the degree to which we've shown a commitment as a state to enforcing the existing wage and hour laws. So again, this is not a question of whether stealing from workers is illegal, but there is really a breakdown when we think about the enforcement mechanism to make sure that employers are in fact following the law. So if you're wondering if it's illegal, it is in fact. So I think we're going to move to the second one. Before we move on to fair scheduling, I did want to really bring up, just to provide some context for folks, that we're sort of a laggard in Ohio of the other large cities that have addressed questions of wage theft. So both Cincinnati and Columbus have passed really robust wage theft ordinances. We're really looking to Columbus as a model in terms of how their ordinance was actually structured and how it will be enforced over time. So again, the good news is there are examples here in Ohio of the other two large cities passing wage theft ordinances that are ones that we can really sort of use as a template moving forward in terms of thinking through how we'd want to advance a wage theft ordinance here in Cleveland. And I'd also say, and Deb can jump in, the campaign has been connecting with a lot of national partners, the National Employment Law Project, folks that have helped run campaigns in other cities around the country, the worker centers in both Columbus and Cincinnati. The National Jobs with Justice group has been helping getting together some of the policy around unfair scheduling, for example. So we were trying to tap those networks for sort of the best practices and leveraging some of the best thinking both in the state and around the country on these two particular measures. So again, the unfair scheduling, this is the second pillar of what we think is a two-part campaign that is really important to improving work for folks all across the city. So what are unfair scheduling practices? When you have really unpredictable hours, right? Unstable work schedules, you are on call, or you go in and are sent home if there isn't the demand. It's again, when workers have very little control over their schedules, which really has a rippling effect on being able to plan and, sort of live life outside of work. Something you see really often, I think Deb might have some examples around, is in the retail sector where workers are brought in, there aren't any customers really, and they have an algorithm that essentially says, we're not cashing in enough money, and so they send folks home, right? And so again, folks are sort of on call. They may get called back in later in the day, so they're not available to be working in other places, or may have to have childcare available in case they get called back in. So again, it's that lack of control and predictability over schedules that makes things especially difficult for folks that are lower wage workers in our economy.
The other way that an employer can get someone, if this is not a union work site, is requiring someone to stay over and work extra hours because the next person on the shift doesn't show up and there's no coverage. And because we are an at-will state, people can be fired for any reason. So if the employer says you have to stay for the next 4 hours, and if you don't, you're fired, they can get them for insubordination. So that's the other thing with unfair scheduling. And you just have to think about the circumstances for some people, especially people who have young children, single parents that don't have childcare, but the boss is making them stay or they lose their job. Yeah,
exactly. I think that the childcare scenario, and also the other thing that we've heard a lot from folks as we're gathering stories, and we'll get into this a little bit later, is particular on folks trying to go to school too. If you have a school schedule and you're getting called in, it makes it finishing any school program really difficult if you don't have that basic control. And I think Deb gets to a really important question, is that we see more and more of this as we have fewer and fewer workers, particularly in the private sector, that are part of a union, right? And so again, you don't have collective bargaining agreements providing protections for workers around these types of things. And so employers take advantage of that and exploit that. So again, like these become more and more fissured jobs that are really difficult for folks to piece together a decent standard of work. So why don't we go ahead, if we don't have any questions from folks. So a little bit more about this. We sort of talked a little bit about this, but to put a little finer point on it, who experiences unfair scheduling, and really why is this such a serious issue? Because it really is one that really gets in the way of folks being successful in terms of being able to piece together decent work. So again, it can really hinder folks' ability to put together other work. I mean, we hate to have an economy where workers have to have more than one job. But again, this makes it incredibly difficult if you are sort of on call or aren't given enough advance notice to be able to determine what hours you're going to have for one employer versus another. And then it makes it really difficult to take care of any other training or educational opportunities that may crop up because you can't commit to specific times because you're not given advance notice on your schedule. And then it really comes into sharp relief when we think about folks' ability to arrange childcare, right? If you have different floating schedules and hours and you're in a position where you're trying to line up childcare, that can everything can kind of unravel. And again, it really exacerbates access to those things, whether it's transit, healthcare, childcare, like a lot of stuff can really come unglued when you don't have that level of predictability. All right. So again, here, this is just a look at what we can do here in Cleveland, right? And the good news is, again, Cleveland City Council and the new administration are well positioned to do something about these two really important issues. And again, we can follow the lead of our peer cities here in Ohio and looking at the wage theft question, and we can really be a leader and on the vanguard on the question of fair scheduling and developing a fair scheduling ordinance. One last thing I'd say about the fair scheduling ordinance is this is something that employers can do that really doesn't cost them much money. There are programs that ensure that folks are provided 2 weeks notice, for example. So typically when you see those fair scheduling ordinances in other places, it requires a certain lead time for an employer to be able to provide to workers so they know when they're going to be required to be working. It does a couple other things. It understands that employers do face unusual circumstances if folks get sick, but it just requires premium pay in those instances that workers are being called in when they normally would not be called in. But again, it provides that infrastructure. Some municipalities have taken the approach where they target specific industries, and then other fair scheduling, whether it's retail, big box, or food service, fast food, and other fair scheduling ordinances have taken a more global approach where it's about workers that are hourly workers in terms of providing stability and scheduling. And so again, we're looking at some of those best practices and what has worked best in other jurisdictions. But in terms of what we can do here in Cleveland, what the campaign is calling on is City Council to allocate resources to enforce existing wage and hour laws. And this can happen, there are a couple ways to enforce these, right? So we also want to get creative. The city's procurement process, their licensing and tax enforcement and other incentives that if an employer is found guilty of wage theft, they can either have a license pulled, they can no longer be a vendor that the city does business with. So we want to see a robust thinking by the city to really deter employers from doing the wrong thing and being sort of a low road employer. So again, we want to make sure that the city is using all the tools in the toolbox to make sure that we have employers providing fair work in the city. And then we want to make sure, and Deb can jump in on this one and the next one, because Deb is a little closer to the question of making sure that we have workers front and center in terms of enforcing this, because some of the best practices in some other cities around wage theft is really to have worker boards that are part of nonprofits that do some of this work to enforce wage and hour laws. But I will turn things over to you, Deb, on those 2 points.
So I just wanted to back up so that people understand minimum wage in Ohio, you earn $19,000 a year. And that's way under what it costs to actually live comfortably in the city. And that's if you're working 40 hours a week all year long. So that's why it's so important, especially like with the fair scheduling, because as Nora said, a lot of people have to end up working 2 and 3 minimum wage jobs just to survive. Whether or not they don't get the full hours, or because obviously minimum wage is not a livable income as it is here in Ohio. But one of the things that we are looking at, and that's Cleveland Jobs with Justice, and being a part of the National Jobs with Justice Network, is instituting a workers board here in Cleveland made up of workers, not political appointees, not somebody's friend that gets on the board, but actual workers, that anyone that's a victim of wage theft or fair scheduling, if we get them both in, can go to the workers board for remedies. The workers board would also have the power to work within the different departments in the city that they need to. So that is probably one of the best ways that we can implement and enforce these types of resolutions, because they are very important. And I know sometimes people think, well, I talked about Walmart. Well, what is the city going to do to Walmart? Walmart, in most cases, and these big retail chains get tax abatements. So if they are found guilty that they are committing wage theft or not complying with fair scheduling, they lose their tax abatements. So there is a way that the city can basically enforce this with somebody like a big retail chain.
Yeah, and I think, again, we want to make sure the city's leveraging every tool. Again, like, we don't want public dollars to be used in a procurement process to buy goods or services from an employer who is undercutting, is engaging in wage theft or is not providing, abiding by a fair scheduling ordinance. So again, I think Deb's exactly right. There are a whole host of tools that these can really address. And then the second part is, again, we really are going to call on city council to enact a fair scheduling ordinance built around the best practices that we've seen with other fair scheduling ordinances. And again, we're connecting with those cities that have had successful campaigns. And we have, research and policy capacity here at the local level. We have a number of attorneys that are committed to helping us craft this language. I think what I would say now is that we have, particularly on the wage theft side, really a basis with leveraging the Columbus ordinance. And the experience of folks in Columbus. It's a relatively recently adopted ordinance that was really a partnership of labor, the Worker Center in Columbus, and a bunch of community and advocacy organizations that were really front and center in terms of getting that done. But I think the good news is, we've done a number of community briefings on this. We're in the process of doing some city council briefings, and we'll be working to try to brief the new administration as well. But that the idea is that we have done a lot of the legwork in terms of the policy work and some of the best practices, but this is not fully, can you send a copy? Yes, we're happy to send a copy. And Chris, the good news is you'll get the more detailed sort of granular briefing with Grace, and we're really grateful that you'll be on that call, but we are happy to provide examples of that. So we're going to be getting some of those best practices to synthesize and distill them. But again, on the wage theft side, we really see Columbus as largely being the vanguard, and on the fair scheduling, really try to distill and synthesize some of the policy work that's been done around the country. But we really want to engage closely with council and with other key partners that are endorsing organizations on the campaign to sort of put the finer points on the actual legislation itself. So that's sort of where we are from a process standpoint. Deb, anything else on that? I know. Yep. So just this is a partial list because it turns out clipping all of the logos, you don't get that many on a slide. So they're over, they're well over 80 endorsements at this stage. But again, Policy Matters Ohio is a really critical partner thinking through some of the Policy Matters Ohio has done some really great work, really quantifying and detailing the extent to which wage theft is a problem, both in Cleveland and across Ohio. Cleveland Jobs with Justice with Deb is important in terms of utilizing that national network. Particularly, we got some really interesting language on a fair scheduling ordinance that is really helpful. The Young Latino Network, NEOC, the Homeless Advocacy Organization, Black Lives Matter, the Cleveland Teachers Union, the Local Musicians Union, OPAL, OPEIU, Cleveland Owns. Those are just a couple to give you a little sense of the broad-based and growing network of folks that really want to see this happen here in the city. We have a website. We were waiting on getting all of the logos, the official logos from folks. So we will have those posted soon in terms of all the endorsing organizations. But I know the big question you're all wanting to know about is how to endorse the campaign. So how do you endorse the campaign? Deb, do you want to, I know we'll drop it in the chat, but we'll also email it out. Do we want to drop the, it's guardiansforfairwork.com. If folks want to go there, you can endorse the campaign. You can share on social media. Deb did a nice job taking our logo and turning it into a social media profile picture. I think Deb and I both have that, and we can share that social media thing. But the thing that is probably most important that we really need help with folks all across the city is really those examples. We've been cataloging and really finding those examples of both wage theft and fair scheduling issues. So there are workers all across the city, like we said, in all sorts of industries. And so the more examples that bring into sharper relief the gravity of this problem, we want to be able to demonstrate that and sort of show what this campaign is really about. So if folks have examples, whether it's personal or a neighbor or a family member that's, had experienced wage theft or had to deal with unfair scheduling in the workplace, we would love you to be able to provide those examples. You can send them to through the website. Any of those examples, you can reach us through the website. If you're interested in providing public comment in an upcoming city council meeting around this campaign and support of this campaign, and particularly for those that live in the city of Cleveland, if you can reach out to your member of city council, urging them to support the campaign, to sign on as an endorser, to really sort of help us grow the network. Those are sort of the immediate next steps. Deb, did I miss anything, Deb?
I'll make sure that Steve has all the links to the website, and we also have a group on Facebook, so please join the group. We're asking people we're trying to flood Facebook by changing their profile pictures. That's up there, you can grab it, and if you would change your profile picture, it'd be really nice to see a bunch of Guardians for Fair Work profile pictures out on Facebook. So I'll provide those links for Steve, and he'll have those tomorrow in the follow-up email.
Yep. And just by way of a little bit of background, the Northeast Ohio Worker Center had a retreat and really did a deep dive with the folks from both the Cincinnati and Columbus Worker Centers. And the Columbus folks really did provide some background in terms of what that campaign looked like, some of the lessons learned in terms of the ordinance itself. But again, I think the good news is that there are really resources here in the state that we can leverage in terms of understanding how we want to move the campaign forward. But we threw a lot in all at once. You were all that's standing between me and dinner, so that might have been why I talked as fast as I did to be able to get to dinner. I'm sure you're all feeling the same as well. I did get my booster shot today, so I'm kind of feeling a little, like might need an early night's sleep here. But I did want to open it up for questions, reactions, questions. Yeah, so Brian asked an interesting question on the question of preemption. So the good news is we feel really confident on the question of wage theft because there have been successfully passed ordinances in both Columbus and Cincinnati that have withstood any challenges up until this point. The other thing I would say is, but you can't use legislation you were talking about. Hang on, but can't they use legislation they're talking about to include? I will look at that more carefully when I'm not trying to answer the other part of the question. So in terms of the question of preemption with the fair scheduling, again, that's part of the deeper dive with some of the policy work that we're looking at ways in which in other jurisdictions, not all, in other states. So the questions of home rule are a little bit different, but we're looking at ways in which you can sort of best position yourself on those questions to withstand those challenges. And I'm not suggesting that the fair scheduling wouldn't face some of those challenges, but again, we think it's the right campaign and the right issue. So Brian's specific question was, I know the city was preempted by the state on passing the $15 minimum wage, but can't they use the legislation you are talking about to include living wage provisions when it comes to contracting with businesses? My understanding is that there is a city requirement right now that employers pay a minimum of $15. There are certainly ways in which from a public purchasing standpoint, that we can certainly, I think, dig in on that a little bit more. But I think it's a question of the difference in terms of what the requirements are for publicly fund, like if you're using essentially the city as a procurement vehicle versus what's required of businesses in the private sector that aren't getting public dollars. But again, like the goal is to have the fair scheduling and the wage theft ordinance cover employers all across the city.
So if I could, there already is a living wage ordinance in Cleveland. That was one of the things that Cleveland Jobs of Justice did many years ago. So we already have, and it's for contractors, for those that contract with the city. So that's already there. The other thing, and Pat just asked about immigration groups. You got it right here. Cleveland Jobs of Justice. We have a whole other table that we do in immigration. So yes. And this is one of the reasons why we're taking this on as well, because that's one of our major campaigns is immigration. So yes.
But it is a great question. Like those are areas like you often see workers most exploited if they're worried about questions of documentation status, and employers often will take most advantage of in those contexts. So I think that is an important point and an important piece that we'll have to be considering as we advance the campaign. And Deb is an important partner in sort of thinking through those immigration related items. I'm not sure, Brian, if we got to your question or if, that was what you were looking for in terms of. All right. Any other questions or comments from folks?
Nora, I'm guessing that there's a lot of low-wage workers who wouldn't know that they were the victims of wage theft and unfair scheduling. And,
Yep.
and I'm wondering, like in cities that have enacted workers boards who are serious about stopping this, is there a mechanism in place to educate workers?
Yes, I mean, I think in the two things. In the best scenarios, Local Progress is a national network of progressive local elected city council members. And they did a policy briefing and they essentially said that exact thing, that education and outreach component is one of the most important things. And to have that in a funded way is really critical to make sure that folks are aware that their employers are actually engaging in wage theft. And Eric, great question. The folks from the campaign did initial outreach to, were asked to present at the North Shore delegate meeting. And so we were able to get in front of everyone, but there's also been outreach to both 1199 and Local 1. I was a purple person for 10 years, so I worked, so they were first on my list. So no, absolutely.
And Sandra Ellington from Local 1 is my go-to person for essential workers, especially with essential city workers, because our city workers, the Cleveland city workers, did not get hazard pay during the height of the pandemic like other folks did. So
formal endorsements. We've had a lot of supportive conversations, Pat, but we honestly just launched and are doing the briefing on the campaign itself. So we will circle back after doing the council briefings, but we're really optimistic based on the response of a significant number of the council members. And I think, again, the question, particularly, it's really a two-pillar campaign because both are really important in terms of improving the quality of jobs. But I think it is pretty easy for folks to envision that we don't want to be left in the dust by Columbus and Cincinnati, right? Like, and then we can actually position ourselves to be a bit of a leader on the question of fair scheduling. So, I think that'll be well received for that reason alone. So. But we would love, again, this is a question, if you can spread the word to get examples or folks are interested in getting engaged more in the campaign. This is really in its infancy. And so you're sort of here at the ground level and there's a chance to sort of help build this campaign. I think, believe it or not, Deb and I both are very fast talkers. So we did it in a record time. It turns out like it took us maybe 10 or 15 minutes less than it took the other person doing this one at the community briefing. So we saved you a lot of time, guys. You're welcome.
Any questions or comments on anything we talked about tonight? I kind of at the beginning said we'll pause for questions afterwards, and then I didn't. But everybody good to go? So I remember a year ago at our November meeting saying that unfortunately, because of COVID, we're probably not going to have a get together for the holidays, and hopefully next year we'll be able to do it. And we're at next year, and it doesn't seem like we're going to be able to do it live. So thank you very much for coming tonight. And if we don't see you in the next few weeks, have a great
Steve, sorry, yeah, Joey has a question. Sorry, I didn't mean
Joey, I'm sorry.
Hi, I got a general question or comment, kinda. By the way, I'm with AFL-CIO delegate and AFGE, American Federation of Government Employees, Local 3283. And my comment kind of is like, I think, how do you address, I mean, I know this is kind of a loaded question, but how do you address people being brought up as kids? We're just brought up in this such a materialistic, capitalistic society. And, me, myself, I'm probably guilty too. I like some nice stuff. But I mean, when it comes to being like a worker out there, people don't even advocate for themselves. You know, they don't even think much of, you know, they always feel like they have to explain themselves with even the simple stuff, like say with calling off at a place when your leave is what you own. You know, I know you'd have to call up and request, like, say, I'm requesting sick leave or I'm requesting whatever, but people feel that they have to justify and almost like they're already giving away information it doesn't even need to. The supervisor doesn't need to know that your kid is sick. The supervisor does not need to know that you have a headache that day. That leave is the same stuff as money in the bank, you know. And then the other thing is, you know, I mean, just being brought up, they don't really get to hear about in school worker rights, the stuff. I mean, people have no clue the 40-hour work week, pensions and all this stuff was like super hardly fought, you know. I mean, like I watched like Hoffa, and I mean, what they went up against RTA, I mean, the guys running RTA were ruthless to their workers, you know, and the Teamsters did that, you know. And then you know, and finally, you know, with the Civil Service Reform Act, you know, the federal workers have a union. You know, you hear a lot of stuff from I mean, not yous, definitely anyone here, you're not going to hear that from, but, you know, a lot of people say, you know, like, well, why do government workers need a union? And it's like, who protects your stuff at work? You know, like the government is like anything else, politicians, and we know there's a lot of even corporate Dems, they would have you, you know, to save, you know, the taxpayer money, have us working at $8 an hour. You know, like, how do you get across? I guess I threw a lot at you, but I'm saying, like, you know, the older I've gotten, it seems like it's hard to get across to people because it almost feels like the culture in the United States is almost geared up against the worker. You know, and
Yeah, I think there are two things I would say, and then I would defer to Deb. I think the first is, you're exactly right. I think part of this in a lot of ways is to correct the challenges that workers face, particularly in low wage sectors, but it's really to have a conversation about what is work and what's dignified work and what are people owed. None of the employer's ability to run a successful enterprise is there unless workers give their labor, right? And so I think part of this is about having that bigger conversation about work and what our expectations should be, because I think that's exactly right. And it's a way to start having that conversation all across the city. Because I think you're right. Like, this is not a single thing that's going to fix all issues with work, but it's a way of starting to have that conversation and raising consciousness around work, particularly when we said early on that you have fewer and fewer people that are members of unions, right? That can sort of get that sort of political and sort of economic education through being a member of a union. So I think that that's one way that we see this campaign as being important. And then I'm going to put a plug in on the second question in terms of the education side, which is something for folks in Noodle. You are a delegate. And so something that after I left working in the labor movement, I worked at the Labor Education Center at DePaul University in Chicago, and we did an entire high school program. So we did a whole collective bargaining exercise with social studies teachers at high schools. And so we negotiated a contract and we brought in folks that did that professionally. And we did it for almost 2,000 workers in the city. So one of the things we can think about is, you know, doing programs like that, where you're actually doing programming of younger kids to understand the sort of workplace dynamics and the questions of power in our economy, right? Just throwing that out there. If anyone wants to work on that, there are templates to sort of use and grow that work really well in some other places. So just some thinking.
Thanks for that. I just understand. It just seems like the cult, like I said, it just seems like the culture of the United States is so geared up, you know, where the workers don't have a voice. They're almost they seem like they don't even understand that they can have one, in a way. I don't know if I'm wording it right.
If I could, because you can tell that you are a union brother, because Ohio and many other states are at-will states, which means the employer, if you look at the employer wrong, and I tell people this all the time, they'll get you for insubordination and they can fire you. So that's the protection of the unions. But the last time I knew, we only had 16% union here in the Cleveland area, and we were one of the highest in the country. And I don't know what that percentage is anymore. I haven't looked at that lately, but again, and I keep saying this, we are an at-will state, so people can be fired if they're not under a union contract, and it's at the will of the employer. And so that's what our major issue is, and they can hold this over their workers and threaten their workers. If you don't do what I want, then I'll fire you.
Yeah.
And the only recourse is to file some kind of a formal charge, like through the Department of Labor or the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So,
Yeah, and I think I would just put a final point on this. I think, again, campaigns like the Guardians for Fair Work or the effort to pass the PRO Act to reform labor law at the national level sort of start to build capacity where workers are engaging in concerted collective activity together, right? And so building that muscle and being part of a collective struggle is part of how you start to change that culture. And it doesn't happen overnight, but I do think you know, anyone that's been involved in an organizing campaign, particularly in the private sector, knows how ugly it gets with employers. Like, you know, there really aren't any private sector campaigns I was on where workers were not fired for unjust reasons during that organizing drive. And so I think, you know, we're up against a lot, but I think these are important campaigns to start to raise the consciousness around these issues. And I think Deb's right. You clearly are a union brother because you know what the analysis is, but people don't have that exposure to thinking about what work looks like by being part of a union. So just got to grow the labor movement now.
Right.
Yeah. Thanks so for your comments.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. And appreciate you being on.
Joey, are you a CCPC member, or did you hear about this from someplace else?
Unmute there. Actually, at our AFL-CIO meeting, I forgot what her name was. She spoke and she left couple flyers.
Grace Heffernan.
Yeah, I think that's who it was. And actually, I was just moving some stuff. Friend was here, and we were moving some stuff for my mom. She's assisted living, so we're just doing that. And my girlfriend texted and actually asked if I was gonna jump on this tonight, because I had been talking about it, and I got mixed up. I was so busy, so I jumped on a little bit late. But long-winded way of answering. It was just at that meeting. I think middle of November we had our last meeting, and that's how I heard of it.
Okay.
Oh, and you know what intrigued me was when they mentioned about, you know, like the sports team. I think it was you know, about how they you know, they don't mind getting finance help from the public sector, but yet they don't have like good paying union jobs. You know, that part should be part of the agreement only. If not, pack it up, go to another city. I mean, why can't they pay them?
Right. And I appreciate your comments. I don't know if I can't remember if you were here at the beginning, but we're going to send an email out tomorrow with a bunch of links. If you sign up to become one of our members, membership is free. I think you'll like what you see, you know, the other things that we do. We're very pro-union.
Okay, I'll put my email in the comments. I think I left my email on her. She sent something around.
Well, we have your email because you're on the Zoom link.
unless you signed up under another name.
No, I signed up on my own name. I did get an email from you, but I think my girlfriend actually resent the link to me. She's not on it right now. She didn't end up going on. But I could check my emails again.
No, we're going to send you an email tomorrow, which will have a bunch of links.
Okay, great.
That's right. So, and one will be to join the organization. So,
yeah. And, you know, again, like we think the campaigns like the Guardians for Fair Work can also not allow there be to essentially bottom feeders in the economy that make it harder for unions to raise standards for their own members, because we have folks undercutting good paying jobs. So again, like we appreciate all the work that folks are doing in the labor movement on an ongoing basis. So any other final questions before we eat dinner, guys? Matt Coons is on here, who is the graphic designer who did the really super cool logo that we have. So a huge thanks to Matt for his really talented work on getting the logo together. We've gotten great feedback on that. So.
And if you see really cool logos about anything progressive around the county, there's a good chance that Matt did it. He's excellent.
Yeah. So keep him in mind for all things progressive. So, all right. Thanks, guys.
All right, everybody, have a great holiday season, and thanks for coming tonight. Doesn't look like anybody else has their hand up. Good night.